You know, sometimes it can be very interesting what the universe has planned for you. Let me set the stage for you by introducing myself. Though I will be not using my real name, I can tell you I'm a nearly middle aged man living here in the US of A. I have a relatively uneventful life nowadays and spent most of my time at work or in the gym. Through work limits my time anywhere else. I like to get out and see the world and enjoy some other outdoor activities. This will be important later. About a week ago, I had some time off, so a bunch of us decided to go out for a few drinks and hit up a club or two before the long weekend. Now, I'm not much of a club guy in the first place, nor do I understand the concept of driving to a place where you're going to go drink knowing you got to drive home. In any case, I went with them and was officially the backup designated driver, meaning I could drink until the primary DD started drinking. Bars were okay at best, though one being a nudie bar helped the whole night along a bit. While there, a young dancer kept going on about how she would have fun with me if I purchased a champagne room. I declined her offer several times. The time I had to make it perfectly clear that I would not go back with her. I thought it was a bit strange that an hour or two later I met her again at the last dance club we were going to visit that night. We talked for a while and she seemed to like the hobbies that I do, though she looked far too thin to be doing half of them. Not that she was anorexic, just really thin. Most people in outdoor activities have some level of definition to their muscles, but not her. It's okay though, I like thin girls. About halfway through the night, I began to think of how lucky I was to find a girl like this. She even bought us a few rounds of drinks. Don't worry, I handed my keys over to the bartender so I wouldn't be tempted to drive while impaired. Although I didn't let anyone know that my body chemistry was very efficient when it come to processing vodka. Mainly due to my bloodline coming from Eastern Europe, that is. I will say that a few tequila shots and I'm on the floor in a lot of pain. Before I get off topic, I will say that she was getting very aggressive with her hand movements. It was a good thing we were on the dance floor. FYI, I can't dance for shit. For the most of the time, so most people couldn't see what she was doing. I will say that I let my hands go where they pleased as well. It wasn't too much longer and we were headed for the door. I only paused to tap a buddy on the shoulder so he knew that I wouldn't be around to drive anyone home. He looked at her, then looked back to me and gave me the "I'll see you in a few days" look. Now, I did try to keep things PG-13 on the cab ride back to my place because I didn't want to be one of those hidden camera channels. Once we got back to our destination, however, that was another story. We started in, and all I could think was that she was being nice enough to me, and I was going to make sure she knew that I appreciated how kind she was. 2 bottles of homemade wine and a couple glasses were the only thing I could grab before she pulled me into the other room. You would think that this story belongs on another channel, but this is where things began to go from the best night of my life ever to what the fuck. I pulled every trick I had learned to make sure that she crossed the line of the mountaintop every minute or two. I was on top when I noticed something was wrong. On her forehead there seemed to be some sort of distortion. Two, in fact. I played it off as my eyes playing tricks to me, especially with the alcohol, on me since the blood was kind of being siphoned away from my brain and kind of into another head. A few seconds later, I'm really putting everything into making sure she has no fluids left. And I feel something only up against, it's pressing against my knee. This snaps me back to reality, and I look at her face again. She has horns growing out of her forehead. What the hell? I shake my head and try not to stop what I'm doing while inside I'm trying to figure out what the hell is going on. Then I feel something slap against my leg again. I look, it was a tail. An actual no shit tail. I began to freak out trying to make sense of what I'm seeing while my body basically is working on autopilot. I pick her up so that we're face to face and get the biggest shock of all, as she had another big, oh, wings unfurled from her back. Big, bat-like wings, the same color as her skin, spread out wide. I couldn't keep my mind and had finally had enough. I reached my arms around her and pinned her arms to her sides. "What are you?" I asked. She began to come down from the cloud she was on and realized that I had stopped and was looking into her eyes. She looked puzzled for a moment and then realized that she had shown her true self to me. I hugged as tight as possible to get her to hold still, which, by the way, didn't work. Her fingernails began to extend as she began clawing at my sides. I got a few good lacerations until I squeezed her so tight I could feel her joints begin to give. I thought maybe it would work and she would be out soon. Wrong again. Without me knowing, she had extended her canine teeth and plunged them deep into my shoulder. My traps weren't as thick as they should be, as she would have ripped them clean out. In sheer desperation, I slammed us both into the nightstand, the solid piece of wood, thank God for family heirlooms, and she smacked the back of her head extremely hard. I clipped the side with my own head on it as well as we tumbled over. I lost my grip due to the strike and jumped to my feet as soon as I could and realized she was free from my bear hug. Instantly, I got in position for a rear naked choke. I know, a little on the nose, consider everything, and realized she was out cold. I wasn't taking any chances with this thing. I brought her to the basement and tied her to the most secured pipes I could find. This is when I could finally get a good look at her. Like I said before, she had wings that stretched out about 8 feet on either side. Considerable since she only stood about maybe 5'10". The tail that hit my leg was long and slender and reached just below her knees. The horns on her head were not located on the forehead as I originally thought they were. In reality, they were about half an inch above the hairline. I guess from the position I was in, they only looked further forward. Her nails on both her hands and her feet had extended into almost like claws, but still more human-like than animal. Her teeth were not shaped into fangs as I had originally thought. Her canine teeth were slightly longer, but all the other teeth looked normal. Her skin was still clean and as flawless as before. It made her look almost angelic if it wasn't for the fact that she had just tried to kill me. With all the changes, the one change that stuck out the most actually was something that didn't change. She was still very thin. So much so that I thought I had broken her when I hugged her so tight. I only contemplated this for a few moments until the pain reminded me that this thing had not gone down without a fight. It's a good thing I keep extra medical supplies around because I think I used it all. The lacerations on my sides looked like they had needed stitches, along with a bite on my neck. Thankfully, sutures worked fine. As for the cut on my head, I had to look a lot closer to make sure it wasn't too deep. All in all, I made it out of the skirmish pretty much all right. I was trying to finish up bandaging myself when I heard her thrashing around. She was roaring in a kind of cat-type tone, but was still human. She was still thrashing as I came into the room. She looked at me angry, but as she noticed the amount of dressing I had, she almost looked smug. Silently, I walked over and began to dress her wounds. She squirmed at first, but stood still long enough for me to finish. Once done, I picked up a folding chair, placed it in about maybe a meter in front of her, and sat down. I looked into her eyes and asked, "So, are you going to answer me now?" She looked pissed. I continued, "What are you?" She responded with, "Can't you tell?" Just to get under my skin, I answered with another question. "Do I look like I'm into the occult?" Realizing she had been cornered, she finally answered, "Fine, I'm a succubus. Happy now?" "No," I replied. She began to pull on her restraints again. What, don't you know what a succubus is? Well, I thought I did, but since I'm standing, you're gonna have to spell it out for me, I answered to her. She took a deep breath and began to explain. A succubus finds mates and uses sex to absorb life energy to enhance our own. It makes us remain young and beautiful. Do you get it now? I thought for a moment. Then how am I still alive? If you absorb life force, shouldn't that knock me out and then kill me? She turned her head away as though embarrassed. We need to concentrate to do so, and our prey must have their wits, limited. I turned my head slightly, confused on what she was getting at. She continued, Don't you get it? Our prey must be focused purely on pleasure and or else we can't take what we want. If they're focused too much, we can't extract what we need. I added to her thought, and if you are focusing on pleasure, then you lose control? She looked down and nodded almost shamefully, just basically showing defeat. I thought about it for a few moments before continuing. So, why did you try to kill me if you wanted my life force? She looked up with a little bit of anger in her eyes. I was trying to get away. You had discovered me and frightened me by restraining me like you did. I thought about it for a second and realized she was right, though the wounds on me showed that she was truly dangerous. I continued with, Though I wonder what you would have done if you had noticed the transformation first. Doing this, I slightly patted the bandage on my shoulder. We are not hunters like that. I would have tried to hide it, or I would have run. Now I was confused. Run? Like that? She looked down at her feet and adjusted her statement. Running is relative. I can fly too. I have no doubt, I added to this. Continuing with my questions, I went on. So, where do you come from? I mean, are you demonic or something? Her face changed again into one of wonder. Perhaps the origins were, but they don't talk about it. Now my interest was piqued. The first ones are still alive? For how long? I mean, how old? She grinned a bit and responded, Old enough to know never to answer that question. Though the way they talk, they have been around for, God, it has to be at least a century. Thinking for a second, I said, I'll bet they all look young and sexy women like you too. She looks at me in the eyes and says, They're not all women. This information was new to me. Male succubus? I wouldn't even consider it. She laughed at this comment. Yeah, no one ever does. Okay, I said, how does that work? Shrugging a little, she answered, pretty much the same way. However, they must, fuck more women compared to us, fucking men. Think of a pretty boy Chad, Tyron, Jose, or whatever the hell stupid name you want to use. The only real difference is that they can change their skin color. Really? I asked. Well, they have to, she continued. They are usually discovered with some young girl, and the entire town will hunt them down for taking her virginity. Easy to hide if you look like someone else. It took me a few minutes to process all this information. She continued with, Though they are rare, even by our standards, maybe 1 out of every 200 or so. I was in the middle of a thought when she asked me a question. So, do you think I could get a drink? I only hesitated for a moment and then went to get her something. I came back with a drink and a towel. You look cold, I said, as I walked in. I draped the towel over her legs and tucked it under her and held the drink out for her. She still was restrained at this point. I still didn't trust her, and at least trust her enough to think she wouldn't try to escape and tear me apart the moment she had even the slightest bit of freedom. As I tucked in the towel, I could still feel how soft she was. As she drank, I still noticed how beautiful she is. Even as though she still is in her full demonic form, I found it difficult not to notice this exceptional beauty. She seemed to notice and gave a sly grin. I almost reached in to kiss her when the pain from her bite reminded me of what had happened before. I stood up and felt the bandage. It was wet, and this was not good. I got up, excused myself, and went to the bathroom. Thankfully, it wasn't as bad as I thought. A little more liquid bandage got the bleeding to stop. Burns like acid, but the stuff works. I checked the other bandages, and they were very sore, but had not opened up, which was a bonus. I remember thinking that if I had given in to my urges, I would be on the ground passed out from massive blood loss in just a few minutes. After touching up the dressings, I headed back to talk to her. Once again, sitting in the chair in front of her, I said, "So, are you in control of pheromones, or is that an unconscious thing?" She looked puzzled for a second, and then smiled and chuckled a little. She took a deep breath before answering, "No, it's not pheromones, at least not really. Our scent is just pleasurable to humans. It can draw them into us a lot." I looked at her directly in the eyes. "Yeah, that's kind of how pheromones work." She started to say something, but stopped, realizing that she really didn't have a counter-argument. About this time, I realized the sun was beginning to come up. There were limited windows in the room, but a ray did come through. I looked for something reflective and realized that I was still wearing my watch. I reflected the light off the watch crystal to her skin. "What are you doing?" she asked me. "Testing a theory," I answered her. And with a little anger, she said loudly, "I'm not a vampire, asshole!" Stunned, I paused and then asked, "Wait, vampires are real?" She looked up, shocked, kind of like a teenager that had just accidentally let out a friend's secret to their parents. I walked out of the room, grabbed the notebook, came back and sat down in the chair. "Okay, now you're going to tell me everything." She was not exactly forthcoming at first. I thought about waterboarding or something along those lines, but I soon figured out that she wouldn't break so easily. I set up my laptop in front of her and put on some porn while I went to the kitchen and cooked an extensive meal, making sure that I set up the fan so that the smell would reach down to her. When I was done, I brought down 2 plates. She was just squirming about, at least that's what I thought she was doing. I saw the towel moving, but not her legs. So I walked over and pulled it away and saw that she'd been using the tail to assist her in her urges. "Clever girl," I said as I reached for her tail. She then proceeded to kick me, and hard. Her claw of foot tore my flesh again and right under the armpit. This had me worried for a moment that she might have possibly gotten the artery that was close. Once again I lucked out and she had missed. Whew, thankfully. I held my arm down to shut off the computer. I took it into the next room and bandaged myself up, realizing that I was pretty much out of dressings. I used the last piece of gauze and tape, and it was almost gone, nothing left. I had plenty of disinfectant in the house, but everything else was pretty much used up now. I went back in, grabbed 1 plate, sat down, and started eating. Since one attempt at psychological persuasion didn't work, I would try another. It wasn't long before I could hear stomach making noises. I finished up my meal and swapped the plate for the notebook. "So, are you ready to tell me yet?" She kept staring at the food, still waiting for her information first. Then food, I told her. I guess her hunger was stronger than I thought, because she began giving me all sorts of details about all the creatures that did and or still do roam this planet. Everything from werewolves to vampires to fairies to Nephilim to trolls and even dragons asleep around the globe. Even writing this stuff down, it was difficult for me to put it all together. Though, as she was talking about locations of these creatures, it all sort of made sense. I can get into the details later, but the short version is that most of them are incredibly territorial. So, say a werewolf crosses into a Sasquatch's territory, it might end up facing off against several Squatches at once. Though, due to the size of this planet, these incursions, I guess you could say, are exceedingly rare. The only ones that have been in contention of these lines are between werewolves and vampires. Since they both can change back into humans easily, they tend to drift with humans as well. Because humans seem to constantly travel, most creatures look at us as we would look at gypsies. The only reason they haven't wiped us out is our sheer numbers. Of course, a little genetic diversity is nice. It turns out that for population reasons, they require us after all. You see, actual pregnancy between creatures is such a rarity, it's almost insane. One of their geneticist friends figured out why. Because so many of their genes are dominant genes from creatures, it causes the fertilization to be basically shorted out. Think of it in these terms. If you were to have a closed society for several generations, you will have degradation over time, mainly to the point that the children are not able to be produced. With most of the creatures, this happens in the very first generation, but backwards. Any that can produce offspring are held up to the highest level and kept in the highest security of their tribe and that they can offer due to the value they have to the group. That is, if they have both sexes and all. Some creatures are a single sex group. Goblins, trolls, can only produce male offspring regardless of whatever species is their mother. On the other hand, lamias and harpies can only produce female offspring. I did ask if those two creatures had a child, what would it be? It would take on the mother without exception. I had to stop about halfway through her explanations and get her some food since her stomach was rumbling so much that I almost couldn't hear her talking. I'm not a monster, after all. Noticing the sun was going down about the same time she had finished. I'm sure there was more information, but maybe some other time. I finally asked her, "How come you haven't turned back into looking human again?" "I was trying before," she said, "but you stopped me." Confused, I asked, "Explanation, please?" She sighed a little. "I'm a succubus, dummy. My transformations are usually linked to sex." What?" I asked. She continued by explaining that if her transformation was triggered by a climax, then she needs to climax again to basically reset her body. After that, she can transform at will again. Though I'm sure many would like to know details, down to the most intimate, of course, of how I returned her to her original form. Let's just say that she may be a creature, but she's a woman first. Many women really like to be dominated in an intimate setting, not to the point of pain, mind you. Just something as simple as not letting them move their arms can be enough. Remember that she was still bound to the wall. It made the angle a little weird, but, if you pardon the pun, doable. Right before the transformation back, she must have been feeling pretty intense because she bit my trap muscle again. This time on the other side, and sunk her teeth deep in. I paid her back in kind, drawing just a little bit of blood in the process. I felt bad about it for a few moments, though she must have enjoyed it because she began to bite even harder, and I could feel her tail begin to retract away. I made sure I kept going back and forth until she was totally back to herself again. Though I didn't finish. I sat her down and started to undo her restraints, looking at one as she was glad I used zip ties with the metal wires inside. It did look like she had tried to chew through them at one point, but to no avail, obviously. Once she was free, I carried her to the bedroom where I simply covered her up and let her sleep. I was a bit tired myself, but opted for a quick shower, though I had to think twice when I realized I had no replaced bandages for afterwards. So I walked back out and saw her getting her clothes back on. "Leaving so soon?" She didn't even look up to me before she responded. Well, it is a new night, and I need to get what I need, and I didn't get what I needed here. Ouch, I said. She paused for a moment and then smiled as she kind of understood what I meant. Oh, no, I got plenty of what I wanted, much more than I expected. It's just you never finished, and I kind of require it. I thought for a second. So it is a biological necessity for you. She just nodded almost shamefully and then looked me in the eye. It was like she hated the idea, kind of like diabetics hate shots for insulin. You know, if you truly need it, then come back tonight and I'll help you. She smiled at this and walked over and then gave me a quick, passionate kiss and whispered, "Then I'll see you later." She said that holding on to me. I reached onto my pocket and pulled out a business card with my number on it. I showed it to her and then slid it into her back pocket. I walked over to the door and then saw her off. This, you would think, is the beginning of a great relationship. Well, I don't know yet. She isn't due for a few hours. I wanted to get this down in case something happens. You see, I don't know anything about succubus culture except what she told me. For all I know, I'll be snatched as soon as I walk out of the house. There's something I do know though. When she was getting dressed, I noticed something about the bite mark on her shoulder. It was gone. When she hugged me, I looked and there was no scar, just that perfectly smooth skin of hers. I guess I have some questions for her. Though that isn't the strangest part. After I got some new bandages, I went to change them after a shower. Most of the wounds had already sealed themselves up. Dry scabs simply fell off in the shower, revealing not even a scar. The only one that still remains at this point is the original bite, probably because it was so damn deep. Even that one only needed a few small band-aids now. I had gone to the gym and realized that I could push beyond what I was pushing before, and my body mass was slimmed a lot since the past day. This can't be natural. I swear it can't. I guess I have a lot more questions for her when she shows up tonight.